Minimalism emerged as a deliberate counterpoint to contemporary consumer culture, challenging the deeply entrenched notion that accumulation of possessions leads to personal fulfillment and happiness. At its philosophical core, minimalism poses a profound and provocative question. Might we find greater contentment not through acquisition and abundance, but through intentional reduction and simplification? This question reverberates through an era defined by unprecedented material wealth, yet accompanied by rising rates of anxiety, depression, and a pervasive sense of disconnection. The philosophical roots of minimalism stretch back through diverse traditions across cultures and centuries. Ancient Stoics like Seneca advocated for moderation and self-sufficiency, arguing that virtue, not possessions, was the path to eudaimonia or true flourishing. The greatest wealth is a poverty of desires, taught Seneca, encouraging Romans to find freedom through wanting less rather than having more. Similarly, Zen Buddhism has long emphasized emptiness, sunyata, and presence, suggesting that attachment to material things creates suffering while detachment creates space for enlightenment. In Japan, the aesthetic principle of the meaningful emptiness between objects, recognizes that absence can be as powerful as presence. Modern minimalism builds upon these ancient foundations while responding to our uniquely overwhelming era of abundance, information overload, and digital clutter. The movement gained substantial momentum following the 2008 financial crisis, when many questioned the stability and meaning of lives built around consumption and debt. Pioneers like Joshua Fields Milburn and Ryan Nicodemus, known as the Minimalists, began documenting their journeys away from high-paying corporate jobs and consumption-focused lifestyles towards simpler, more intentional living, finding not deprivation but liberation in the process. Many who embrace minimalist principles report a surprising discovery: that removing excess creates space for what truly matters. This space manifests both physically and mentally. The unburdening of physical possessions often parallels an internal unburdening, as if the weight of ownership extends beyond the merely physical into cognitive and emotional realms. Psychologists have noted this phenomenon, identifying cognitive load as the mental effort required to track, maintain, and make decisions about possessions. Each item we own demands something of us: attention, maintenance, storage, concern, creating what some minimalists call the cost of ownership that far exceeds the purchase price. In relinquishing the superfluous, minimalists claim to find mental clarity and emotional freedom. They speak of a lightness that comes from owning fewer things, describing relief from the pressure to organize, clean, repair, store, display, and eventually dispose of possessions. Research increasingly supports these anecdotal experiences. Studies from Princeton University's Neuroscience Institute found that cluttered environments restrict the brain's ability to process information and focus, while orderly spaces allow the mind to work more efficiently and produce less cortisol, the stress hormone. This philosophy also challenges our relationship with objects themselves. Relationships often far more complex and emotionally charged than we might initially recognize. We assign sentimental value to possessions, sometimes conflating memories with the objects that witnessed them. We invest identity in brands, allowing what we own to signal who we are to others and even to ourselves. We seek security through accumulation, as if acquiring enough might protect us from future scarcity or uncertainty. Minimalism invites us to examine these connections critically and ask whether our possessions truly serve us, or if we have inadvertently become servants to them. The minimalist lens extends beyond physical possessions to examine how we allocate other finite resources, particularly time, energy, and attention. Digital minimalism, a growing subset of the movement, questions our relationship with technology and social media, suggesting that information and entertainment consumption can create the same cluttered effects in our minds that physical objects create in our homes. By consciously limiting inputs, minimalists seek to reclaim attention and direct it toward pursuits they find genuinely meaningful rather than merely distracting. At its most profound, minimalism interrogates the nature of ownership itself. When we say something is mine, what exactly does that mean? The Buddhist concept of impermanence, anicca, reminds us that nothing truly belongs to us eternally. We are temporary stewards at best. Even possessions we maintain throughout our lives will eventually belong to others or return to dust. By loosening our grip on ownership, minimalists suggest we might prepare ourselves for the inevitable losses that life brings and develop greater appreciation for what we temporarily possess. Critics of minimalism sometimes mischaracterize it as asceticism or deprivation, a joyless renunciation of pleasure and comfort. Yet most minimalists would counter that their philosophy is not about having nothing, but about ensuring that what they do have brings genuine value. As minimalist writer Joshua Becker puts it, minimalism is the intentional promotion of the things we most value and the removal of anything that distracts us from them. The emphasis falls not on the reduction itself, but on the purpose that reduction serves, creating space for a life aligned with one's deepest values. The minimalist critique directly confronts modern capitalism's central promise, that consumption leads to happiness and fulfillment. This premise forms the foundation of consumer culture, reinforced through thousands of marketing messages we encounter daily. Buy this product and you'll be happier, whispers the subtext of advertisements. Upgrade your possessions and you'll upgrade your life, suggests the endless cycle of new product releases. This narrative has been so thoroughly woven into the fabric of modern life that it often goes unquestioned, operating as an ambient assumption rather than a conscious belief. Research in positive psychology and behavioral economics, however, increasingly suggests this promise is fundamentally hollow. The landmark work of psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton found that beyond an annual income of approximately $75,000, adjusted for inflation and location, additional wealth yielded virtually no increase in daily emotional well-being. This research supports what philosophers have long suspected. Beyond meeting basic needs, material wealth faces sharply diminishing returns in its ability to generate happiness. The hedonic treadmill, a psychological phenomenon first identified in the 1970s, keeps us running toward acquisitions that quickly lose their capacity to satisfy as we adapt to new baselines of ownership. This adaptation process, known as hedonic adaptation, explains why the thrill of a new purchase fades so predictably. The excitement of acquiring the latest smartphone, car, or home renovation might spike our happiness temporarily, but we swiftly return to our happiness baseline as the novel becomes normal. Each adaptation creates space for a new desire, perpetuating a cycle that economist Thorstein Veblen called conspicuous consumption over a century ago. The futility of this pursuit is captured in the ancient wisdom of Epicurus. Nothing is enough for the man to whom enough is too little. However, minimalism isn't merely about subtraction. It's not a philosophy of negation, but of intentional curation. Its deeper purpose is to create space for what genuinely nurtures human flourishing: meaningful relationships, creative expression, contemplation, and connection to community and nature. Aristotle distinguished between hedonia, pleasure-based happiness, and eudaimonia, meaning-based flourishing, arguing that the latter represents the highest form of human good. By eliminating distraction and overhead, minimalists aim to redirect limited resources, time, energy, attention, money, toward these more fulfilling eudaimonic pursuits. This redirection begins with a reassessment of value itself. In a consumer society, value is typically measured in monetary terms: what something costs or what financial return it provides. Minimalism invites a broader consideration of value that includes impact on mental health, environmental footprint, time requirements, and contribution to one's core purposes. A possession might be affordable in financial terms, but costly in the attention it demands or the space it occupies. Conversely, experiences often provide more lasting satisfaction than material goods, a finding consistently supported by research showing that experiential purchases, like travel or concerts, produce more enduring happiness than material purchases of equivalent cost. The environmental implications of minimalism cannot be overlooked in an era of climate crisis. The average American throws away approximately 81 pounds of clothing annually and maintains a carbon footprint that would require multiple Earths if adopted globally. By questioning each purchase and keeping possessions longer, minimalists typically reduce their environmental impact significantly. This ecological dimension adds moral weight to minimalist choices, suggesting that voluntary simplicity represents not just a personal preference, but a civic responsibility. As theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer observed, the ultimate test of a moral society is the kind of world it leaves to its children. Critics rightfully point out that minimalism can become its own form of privilege and performance. The aesthetic minimalism celebrated on social media, sparse white rooms with expensive designer pieces, often requires substantial initial wealth and overlooks those who live with less out of necessity rather than choice. There's a profound difference between choosing simplicity and having it imposed by economic circumstances. Additionally, minimalist influencers sometimes replace material consumption with status consumption, trading the validation of owning things for the validation of owning fewer things correctly. True minimalism, its advocates counter, isn't about achieving a particular look or count of possessions, but about intentional alignment between values and lifestyle. It can be practiced in any living situation and at any income level. The essence lies not in owning below a certain threshold of items, but in ensuring that what one does own serves rather than hinders one's deepest purposes. As writer and minimalist Colin Wright puts it, minimalism isn't about having less. It's about making room for more of what matters. This distinction between aesthetic minimalism and philosophical minimalism highlights an important point. Minimalism is most valuable as a process of questioning rather than a rigid endpoint. The number of items one owns matters less than the relationship one has with those items and the intentionality behind acquiring and keeping them. Some practitioners find value in exercises like Project 333, limiting one's wardrobe to 33 items for 3 months, or the KonMari method, keeping only items that spark joy. But these structured approaches serve as means to greater awareness rather than ends in themselves. Perhaps the most valuable aspect of minimalist philosophy is its invitation to question cultural defaults and reclaim conscious choice. By pausing before each acquisition to ask, will this truly enhance my life? We resist the automated responses that marketing efforts are designed to trigger. We step outside the script of consumer culture and write our own narratives about what constitutes success, progress, and security. In this questioning lies the heart of minimalism, not a rigid doctrine of deprivation, but a framework for conscious choice about what deserves space in our finite lives. The minimalist proposition ultimately challenges us to differentiate between standard of living, measurable in material terms, and quality of life, the subjective experience of well-being. These measures can align, but often diverge dramatically. A life rich in possessions but poor in purpose, connection, or meaning may represent a high standard of living, but a low quality of life. Conversely, a life with fewer possessions but abundant in meaningful work, loving relationships, and personal growth may register modestly on material metrics while providing profound satisfaction. In a world of unprecedented material abundance, yet widespread dissatisfaction, minimalism offers not an escape from reality, but a more nuanced engagement with it. By stripping away the non-essential, physically, digitally, and mentally, we might discover that what remains is not emptiness but clarity, not deprivation but sufficiency, not restriction but freedom. The question, do we need more to be happy, thus transforms from rhetorical to deeply personal, inviting each of us to define for ourselves what more actually means and whether its pursuit brings us closer to or further from the lives we truly wish to lead.